The man watched helplessly as Shiloh and Marco collapsed on the roof and convulsed violently. They struggled for less than half a minute before they were dead. The man cursed and turned back to Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader. He was surrounded from all sides. Stephen instructed the Leviathan unit to join the battle. They lunged for the man with weapons in hand. There were so many of them that the rooftop became crowded. While the man was fighting with the Leviathan unit's leader, most of his talisman had been affected by the symbols. Their effects had been drastically reduced. Having been forced into a corner, the man decisively used his last resort. It doesn't matter how many of you show up. Your martial arts are nothing special. I'll show you firsthand the difference between you and me. The man threw out his talismans. This time, they wouldn't be coming back to him. The talismans exploded in the night sky, and fragments of metallic material shot out. The Leviathan unit members couldn't dodge in time. The fragments either pierced through them or lodged inside them. It wasn't as simple as a physical wound. The talisman's effects were stacked on the fragments, and they worsened the injury at a rapid pace. The Leviathan unit retreated, but the man didn't stop. The fragments reached the members who were on the outer perimeter of the village. When he was almost out of talismans, he increased his speed and dashed into the night. "Mr. Adams, I'll lead a team and follow him," the Leviathan unit leader said. He motioned for a few elite members who hadn't been harmed to join him, and they gave chase in the direction the man had disappeared. The hospital under the military's command was on high alert from the influx of patients. Everyone who was injured had to undergo surgery to remove the metallic fragments embedded in their muscles. Stephen spent the night at the hospital in case they needed him. He tossed and turned all night without a wink of sleep. The next morning, the Leviathan unit's leader returned with his team. They had dejected expressions on their faces. "We lost him. He still had more of those talismans. It was hard to get close." Stephen had expected this. He didn't think it would be that easy to capture the man. "Our enemies are tenacious and persistent. Every time they fall, they get right back up. They're like weeds on the side of the road. It's enough that you returned safely with your team." During the next round of negotiations, Warhawk's delegation team lost their earlier arrogance. Harris and Brent had heard about the Leviathan unit's operation last night, and they assumed the worst when they lost contact with the man in black. They were forced to change the topic to the International Medicine and Health Association and urged the U.S. diplomats to give them permission to conduct an investigation on the virus outbreak at the northern border. Stephen readily agreed. He couldn't wait for these two annoyances to disappear from his sight. "Bring them to the north and let them experience life beyond the border in the name of an investigation." Trey was surprised that Stephen was being so bold. The members of the delegation team were from Warhawk, but some of them were affiliated with the Internal Medicine and Health Association. Leaving a negative impression on them didn't align with the usual way the U.S. handled diplomatic matters. "Mr. Adams, the association is neutral." "Yes, but the association members and their team aren't. They voluntarily followed Harris and Brent to our country to denounce us. It's only right to include them in the investigation. Besides, this is what they came for." Trey understood and left to make arrangements. He was in charge of escorting Warhawk's delegation team to the north. After wrapping up his work, Stephen went home to see Kim and Valeria. Kim had been spending more time at the villa lately. There hadn't been any progress since Skyreach Corporation's overseas investment project was blocked. The domestic market was also affected by the industrial integration policy, and they took the initiative to cut down the company's business line. "It's been boring while you were away. You were in Annapolis, but you rarely came home to visit. Maybe one day I'll apply for a job at the government's military department. I can be your assistant." Ever since Stephen returned from the northern border, one thing had come up after another. He was swamped with work, and the days passed before he knew it. "I know it's been a while, but I finished my work, and I have a lot more time on my hands now." Kim brought over a plate of fruit with a smile. Those words were enough for her. She missed him whenever he left, but she didn't want him to give up on his career for her. The Leviathan unit was responsible for guarding the villa and giving Stephen updates. He heard that there were people trying to get close to him after finding out that he was the Sovereign, and Kim had been spending her days getting rid of them. Harry and Rebecca's business in the Eastern Port is beginning to take off. What does the family think about it? We're not one of them anymore, so your grandfather needs someone to take over his position and lead the family in the future. They set up the Cerulean Shipping Company, and it's doing pretty well. They've settled on a few major international shipping routes. The family didn't have much to say. All they care about are the profits. Grandpa's providing them with funds and employees. Stephen didn't care about the details. As long as Harry and Rebecca's business conformed to the country's laws, he would let them be. Unbeknownst to Stephen, there was a reason why the Cerulean Shipping Company had developed so quickly, despite the pressure from hostile countries overseas. Harry and Rebecca often met with senior executives of foreign organizations and reached an agreement on several shady deals. They'd constructed a brand new office building for their company near a main road at the Eastern Port area. It had been built using blue-tempered glass. From afar, it resembled a large sapphire that had fallen from the sky. DeAndre personally brought the person in charge of their family's business to inspect the company. At this time, Harry was in the conference room with a cigarette in his mouth as he introduced his company. There are 3 main shipping routes. The profits are stable and the risks are low. In the later stages, we'll need to invest into more transport ships. Our 3 routes include the Korean Peninsula, the Island State, and Warhawk. DeAndre and the other members of the Cassidy family had a whole new level of respect for Harry and Rebecca. To establish a successful business in the maritime industry in such a short period of time was proof of their capabilities. Rebecca also wanted to show off her contributions. Due to the international tension from the conflict at the northern border, our country's businesses, including Skyreach Corporation, aren't doing so well. They're being suppressed by international organizations. Unlike them, our company's business isn't affected because we've reached an agreement with the organizations overseas. Many intelligence agencies had thoroughly investigated the Cassidy family's internal strife. Harry and Rebecca's business partners were interested in supporting them and having them as their allies. As the oldest and wisest person in the room, DeAndre had to give them a few pointers. The Eastern Port is right next to Annapolis. Think of this region as being under the sovereign's constant surveillance. Keep a low profile and only communicate with relevant departments. Don't attract unnecessary trouble. Harry and Rebecca acknowledged his wisdom with an indifferent nod. They'd been blinded by money, and their confidence had soared from their company's success. They had a lot of resentment for Stephen, so they didn't care about him. After spending time with Kim and Valeria for a few hours, Stephen drove back to the hospital to visit the injured members of the Leviathan unit. The medical staff had tirelessly performed operations overnight to remove the metallic fragments. Stephen flipped through the medical records. His frustration from last night welled up inside him. The Man in Black's techniques were unusual and difficult to defend against. The Leviathan unit's military advisor and strategist, Salim, had been guarding the hospital for an entire night. He came over with a suggestion. You've recently become acquaintances with the ancient martial arts factions. That's a rare resource. Maybe they'll know how to deal with that mystery man. The 4 elders and their students were also recuperating in this hospital. They were on a different floor from the Leviathan unit patients. Stephen had never met an opponent he couldn't handle, even after multiple encounters. The man's locations were random and unpredictable. After being ambushed and forced into a corner, he would probably lay low for the time being to recover and plan his next move. The metallic fragments from his talisman had been sent to the Leviathan unit's headquarters for research. They were in the process of analyzing the material and inscribed patterns. As Salim had suggested, the ancient martial arts factions were a rare resource hard to come by. They had vast knowledge that spanned thousands of years. Stephen went to their ward after visiting the Leviathan unit members. The 4 elders had recovered, and their complexion was brighter than before. They hadn't sustained any serious injuries to begin with. Their speedy recovery was coupled with the special healing and medicinal pills from their factions. The same couldn't be said about their students. Internal injuries in the abdomen, concussions, fractures, excessive blood loss. If they weren't martial artists, they would have died 10 times over already. Stephen was concerned about them. Are they out of danger? Will it affect their martial arts? The elders' faces fell. They'll live, but their recovery isn't going so well. We're their teachers, so it's our fault they ended up in this condition. Surviving a battle against an ancient martial artist is already considered lucky. Stephen promised that he would mobilize the best medical team in the country to help the students get past this crisis. When he brought up the talisman, the elder of the Hidden Cloud Temple recognized it. In ancient times, when paper wasn't available, knowledge was carved into bronze artifacts. The material is durable, and the effects are profound. Over time, they were used as weapons in battle. After continuous improvements, people began to carve arrays on the artifacts to use its latent abilities. Some of them were capable of increasing one's strength. There are ancient martial arts factions that specialize in creating these weapons. Their skills are passed down from generation to generation, and they still exist to this day. Stephen had never heard of talismans being used in battle during ancient times until now. It seemed like the man in black had a connection with a particular ancient martial arts faction, but they didn't have the means to investigate his background. From the elder's explanation, Stephen understood that modern smelting techniques and lathe processing wouldn't be enough to forge a talisman. When did talismans become outdated? The elder of the Hidden Cloud Temple picked up the metallic fragment on the table and held it out for Stephen to observe. The fragment consisted of a metal compressed into thin layers. The problem with forging a talisman wasn't the smelting process, but rather the type of metal used. Civilization developed rapidly, and technology has come a long way. Society has evolved into a unified country. A special type of metal is used to forge talismans, but they've become a regulated resource. No one is allowed to mine it. In addition, creating a talisman requires a large amount of energy and a lot of time. It delays a martial artist's cultivation, so the practice gradually became less common as time passed. The history lesson was interesting, but it wasn't much help towards resolving their issue with the man in black. Stephen knew the elders were grateful to him, but it wouldn't be appropriate for him to ask them for assistance. The ancient martial arts factions had stopped mingling with civilization a long time ago. They wouldn't want to get involved in worldly affairs. The elders gave him a thoughtful look. Our factions have books from ancient times related to talismans. We'll ask someone to deliver them to you. I hope they're of help. As for everything else, we'd like to abide by our own rules and maintain a distance from society. Stephen was grateful for the offer. He respected their decision to stay out of the country's complicated issues. After leaving the hospital, he drove to the military department. It was deserted compared to the lively atmosphere in the past. Many of the Leviathan unit members were in the hospital, and they were in no condition to carry out missions. The intermediate-ranked generals and commanders had taken over their duties and went to the borders to inspect their defenses. Stephen gave Trey a call. How's the delegation team doing? They checked the local hospitals and got a preserved sample of the virus. But they don't have professional analytical equipment on hand, so they'll need to bring it back to the Research Institute to continue processing. The International Medicinal and Health Association was a neutral organization. Although the members of Warhawk's delegation team supported Harris and Brent, they hadn't forgotten their priorities. They were serious and responsible when conducting an investigation on the virus outbreak at the northern border. Harris and Brent had their own plans. They were secretive and cautious, but they couldn't escape Trey's surveillance. Harris and Brent are using the investigation as an excuse to enter and leave the border. I suspect they're in contact with our neighboring countries. How are they getting in contact with them? The Allied army was wiped out, weren't they? Yes, but the neighboring countries have stationed their troops at the border to rebuild their defensive facilities. Without concrete evidence, Stephen didn't have a legitimate reason to kick Harris and Brent out of the country. He instructed Trey to keep a close eye on them. On the vast Pacific Ocean, luxury cruise ships pulled up to the docks of an uninhabited island. Armed personnel were on board. They were here to investigate the destruction of the Research Institute on the island. Not long ago, Stephen had instructed the warship's crew to bombard the island after evacuating the researchers and staff and assigning them to Dr. Dalton's team. Because of the island's isolated geographical environment, no one had found out about the destruction until today. The logo printed on the luxury cruise ship belonged to the world-renowned Silver Shield Equipment Manufacturing Corporation. They had a large market share of the traditional thermal weapons industry. Their profits in every continent were close to $100 billion. They were the ideal candidate to assume a forefront role in the development of biochemical weapons. The captain of the investigation team was a beautiful woman named Tina. She observed the scorched island with a frown on her face. Who trespassed on our property? How did they get past security? Two senior executives in charge of research and development hurried over. This island is isolated and relatively unknown. There weren't any martial artists stationed here, and the security guards weren't equipped with weapons. Tina wasn't pleased with their excuses. After a brief investigation on the island, they hadn't found any trace of the intruders. In other words, the other party had achieved a flawless raid. The executive rushed to add to his explanation. According to previous transaction records, one of the Institute's trial products was sold to someone named Odin. It's likely that it was the same virus that was spread at the northern border. It affected the Allied army more than the U.S. military. The U.S. controlled the spread relatively quickly. There's a high possibility that the Sovereign sent a team to attack the island. They obtained the virus's information and developed a drug to counteract its effects. Members of Silver Shield Corporation didn't need evidence to draw accurate conclusions. Tina mulled over their next step. It wouldn't be easy to go against the Sovereign. Their capabilities were evident from the Allied army's defeat. Before we do anything, contact the Medical and Health Association's investigation team and have them confirm the facts. The seemingly neutral International Medical and Health Association was acquainted with various multinational corporations with the mutual goal of amassing wealth. Tina's team completed a thorough investigation of the island fairly quickly. Nothing they retrieved was of much value. It rained often on the island, and most of the rubble and debris had washed away into the ocean. The construction team took over to restore the island to its original state. Tina's team boarded their ship and set sail for the U.S. After the battle at the northern border, the U.S. needed capital to rebuild their country. Aside from the wealthy families, the international business organizations were also interested. The government's official website listed various construction and investment projects. Anyone could sign up to participate as long as they met the conditions. A customs officer went to Stephen's office to inform him that the Silver Shield Equipment Manufacturing Corporation's ships had applied to enter the country for trade. They didn't bring any illegal items on their ships. Influential organizations with complicated backgrounds had to receive the Sovereign's authorization to enter the country. They would also be subjected to constant surveillance under the country's intelligence personnel. Stephen had heard of Silver Shield Corporation. Did you investigate their motives? I have a feeling they're not here for trading. Many large multinational corporations are registered on small, unknown islands for a lower tax rate and to hide their identities. They don't want to be labeled as part of a country or be categorized into a certain group. Their main goal is to earn money. Stephen had no reason to reject them. Their company was skilled in technical aspects, and they could be a benefit to the country. He signed his name on the permit document to allow them entry. On the surface, Tina pretended to be in the U.S. to do business, but in the shadows, she sent out her trusted aides to investigate. They were already active at the Eastern Port. At the Cerulean Shipping Company's office building, a man in shades dressed in a suit and leather shoes walked up to the CEO's office with a serious expression. Harry stood up to give him a warm welcome. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Cade. I didn't expect the company to be so efficient. I just called the staff and you're already here." Cade sat on the couch with his legs crossed and casually lit a cigarette. He was one of Tina's trusted aides. "Your business is a bit too shabby for my tastes. Your building is small, and you don't have many boats. I'm disappointed. You hyped up your company over the phone, but it's nothing special in person." Harry didn't get upset. He kept a smile on his face. Any company was insignificant to Silver Shield Corporation. "Our company has potential for development. We're connected to the Sovereign. Therefore, our cooperation will be beneficial to both sides." Cade tossed 2 bank cards on the table. Harry and Rebecca had been invited to become overseas investment consultants for Silver Shield Corporation. The $50 million in each bank card was their labor fee. Simply put, this was a bribe to obtain information on the U.S. Harry was grinning from ear to ear. He called his employees and asked them to arrange a hotel, but Cade was impatient. "Let's settle our business first. Where's the information we asked for?" "Why so serious? You can't get any work done without a comfortable place to rest." As Harry spoke, he placed a USB on the table. It didn't contain secrets of the country, but rather intel related to business. With an extensive data analysis, Silver Shield Corporation would be able to grasp the economic situation in the region. For example, they would have knowledge of every maritime transport-related company at the eastern port. After investigating their routes and the number of ships, they would be able to analyze a portion of the country's exports. Harry and Rebecca had chosen the wrong path for the sake of benefits. Around the same time, the private detective agencies were suddenly swamped with work. They received an investigation request. The 2 scientists from Warhawk, Amber and Mitty, were missing. The agencies would receive a generous reward in exchange for any clues they could provide in regards to their whereabouts. Even if they didn't find anything useful, they would still be guaranteed an income. Everyone was motivated and put their detection skills to use. The Leviathan Unit's intelligence team reported these incidents to Stephen. A large amount of foreign funds have been transferred to detective agencies. They're investigating the 2 scientists from Warhawk. Stephen suspected that Harris and Brent were behind this. They had deep pockets, so there was no problem with letting them increase the country's detective agencies' income. The previous conflicts had wiped out most of the combat forces under their command, so the only thing they could do now was throw their money away. Stephen doubted the detective agencies had the means to find Amber and Mitty, but they couldn't let Harris and Brent do whatever they wanted either. He decided to discuss this with Dr. Dalton. Mirage Island was Dr. Dalton's research site. The area was secure and heavily guarded. No ships were allowed to sail without permission. When Stephen descended from the helicopter, it felt like he'd been transported to a futuristic era. Dr. Dalton walked over with a smile. He was wearing a plain vest and gold-rimmed glasses, giving him a refined aura. "Mr. Adams, what brings you here? Would you like an update on my latest research?" Dr. Dalton's team were experienced researchers. There was no need for Stephen to inspect their work. The 2 of them walked along the warm and sunny beach to discuss the issue with Amber and Mitty. Stephen was in a dilemma. They've served their purpose, so there's no reason to keep them around. Science has no boundaries. They didn't commit any serious crimes. It's time to let them go. If we keep them here, they'll continue to attract enemies to our territory. But sending them back will benefit Warhawk. If Amber and Mitty had been taken into another country's custody, they would have been killed the moment they were no longer useful. Dr. Dalton agreed with Stephen's opinion. The information that Amber and Mitty provided had shortened the research and development cycles of many projects by at least 5 years. In that sense, Amber and Mitty had made a significant contribution. Dr. Dalton recalled the successful trial with the potions and smart chips some time ago. "I have an idea. What if we implanted a smart chip in their brains? After they return to Warhawk, their actions will be under our surveillance and control." Stephen and Dr. Dalton went to the laboratory to review the smart chip and its relevant data. The AI chip was small, and it was covered with a layer of cells from creatures similar to seaweed. They were bionic cells used to fuse with the neurons in the brain to disguise the chip. If they implanted the chip inside Amber and Mitty, it wouldn't be discovered after they returned to Warhawk and underwent a full body scan. Stephen wasn't a technical expert, so he had many questions. Isn't the smart chip similar to the central processor of a computer? How is it powered without a battery installed? Dr. Dalton turned on the computer and opened up a screen with an optical map of the brain's nervous system. He pointed at the structure of the nerve endings. The neural transmissions rely on bioelectricity. It's similar to the oldest binary code. Negative information is displayed as 0, while other information is displayed as 1. The transmission alternates in a similar fashion. The nature of bioelectricity is a microionization element, and it facilitates the low-energy consumption of the smart chip. The technicalities flew over Stephen's head, but he understood the gist of its miraculous design. Dr. Dalton demonstrated a simulation of the chip's transmission. The chip would process and transmit Amber and Mitty's visual information back to the laboratory computer. This was essentially a secret recording. When Amber and Mitty went to places like the mall, coffee shop, hotel, or other areas with free Wi-Fi, the chip would connect to the network and send encrypted messages. Letting the two of them return to Warhawk was equivalent to sending a spy undercover. Stephen nodded along and agreed with Dr. Dalton's suggestion. The underground fallout shelter on the outskirts of Annapolis received news of the operation and arranged a private plane to escort Amber and Mitty to Mirage Island. While Stephen was waiting for them, he checked the security and defenses in place around the island. The numerous martial artists on guard and advanced weapons and equipment made this place a worthy battle fortress. On closer inspection, Stephen realized that the guards were the prisoners on death row who'd received the potion and had the chip implanted. "There's a lot of them on the island. What if they're secretly plotting with each other behind our backs?" "You don't have to worry," Dr. Dalton reassured. "I entered a command into the radio signal on the island. If they disobey orders, the chip will explode and kill them instantly." The prisoners weren't mindless robots after the chips were implanted. When there were no orders, they were their own person. They retained their free will, and they were anything but stupid. They valued their own lives very much. Guarding the island was 100 times better than staying in a damp prison devoid of light. Stephen scrutinized the prisoners. They appeared to be submissive, but he could never be too sure. He called out to two of the guards and asked them to spar with him at their full strength. Dr. Dalton, who was watching from the sidelines, rushed over to stop him. If anything were to happen to the sovereign on the island, his life and career would be over. "Mr. Adams, please think twice before you act. They were skilled martial artists before the chip was implanted. With the effect of the potion and the high-speed analysis feature of the smart chip, their strength has doubled." Stephen dismissed his concerns with a wave of his hand. He never slacked off when it came to martial arts training. He was constantly improving, so he didn't see a problem. "I can't relax until I test their strength for myself. You two, make your move." With the chip inside their brains, the two prisoners had to obey the sovereign's orders. They charged at Stephen as soon as he gave the command. They unleashed their strongest techniques and aimed for his vitals. Stephen deflected their blows with his palm. The prisoners took a few steps back before leaping into battle again. The chip analyzed Stephen's movements. No matter how simple they were, they had to be executed through the expansion and contraction of the muscles. The chip monitored the minute changes in Stephen's muscles and helped the two prisoners predict his next move. Stephen was impressed as more of his attacks were missed. He gathered his inner energy at his feet and kicked up a storm of dust and sand. It blocked the prisoners' vision. He seized the opportunity and dashed behind them. A series of kicks aimed at his torso landed firmly on his chest. Even if the prisoners didn't have a clear view of their surroundings, the chip could determine the target's position and movements based on the airflow. Stephen was forced to take more than 10 steps back from the impact. He regained his footing and manifested a large phantom of a python. It swept towards the prisoners. The chip regulated their emotions in battle, and they didn't feel any fear even as the danger level rose. The two of them gathered their inner energy at their fingertips to form a blade. They slashed at the python, but they couldn't cut through its skin. The python wrapped around their arms and slammed them to the ground. Dr. Dalton hurried over when the battle escalated. "Mr. Adams, the precision instruments in the laboratory are priceless. They'll be damaged from the vibrations." Stephen immediately dispersed his manifestation, and the two prisoners returned to their guard duty. He was satisfied with the test. This had only been possible because of Dr. Dalton and his team. At that moment, a helicopter descended from the sky. The Leviathan unit arrived with Amber and Mitty. They were escorted into the laboratory for a full-body examination. Implanting the smart chip wasn't a dangerous procedure, and the risks were minimal, but the chip's operation depended on the central nervous system of the brain. Dr. Dalton had to ensure that Amber and Mitty were in good condition to prevent complications. He didn't want to waste Stephen's time, so he told him to come back tomorrow. Stephen had finished inspecting the island. There was no reason for him to stay. He went home and waited for an update. The next day, in the afternoon, Tina was standing in front of the window of a 5-star hotel, observing the city of Annapolis. So many competitors are gathering in the U.S., but the country hasn't been affected at all. Their foundation runs deep, and the sovereign is managing it well. If it weren't for the United States' conflict with their neighboring countries, Tina would have suggested to the higher-ups of Silver Shield Corporation to expand their business in the country. Her trusted aide, Cade, stood beside her. He had a different opinion. Helping the weak and suppressing the strong is the only way to maintain a balance and keep the war at a stalemate. Now that the U.S. has wiped out the Allied army, this is our chance to sell weapons to the losers to raise their strength and help them make a comeback. As long as the conflict continued, the price and demand for weapons would increase. When the Allied army first appeared at the northern border, the higher-ups of Silver Shield Corporation had debated whether they should assist the U.S. or their enemy. If the U.S. fell to ruin, the power would shift, and the world would be at risk of being destroyed. The higher-ups concluded that the best method to profit was an economic competition between countries. Every country had an open overseas market, and it wouldn't be possible to defend themselves completely. They would be forced to engage in a competition of economic strength. Tina and Cade changed into formal attire and took a luxury car to the guest house across from the military department's headquarters. Stephen wanted to meet the executives of Silver Shield Corporation to discuss a potential collaboration. The design of the simple and unadored guest house was aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Everyone took their seats at the round table in the living room. The best fruits and tea were served. "It's an honor to meet the sovereign," Tina said with a smile. Stephen returned her greeting with a polite smile of his own. "Silver Shield Equipment Manufacturing Corporation is internationally famous. I hope this meeting will benefit us both." Tina and Cade cut to the chase, hoping to cooperate with Dr. Dalton's team. A while back, Stephen had demonstrated the United States' advancement in biochemical technology to intimidate Warhawk's previous delegation team. Silver Shield Corporation had caught wind of this incident, and they were interested in obtaining the technology for themselves. While they were here, they would also investigate the attack on the island in the Pacific Ocean. "Our company specializes in manufacturing firearms, equipment, and developing biochemical weapons. This will be beneficial in maintaining an era of peace. We've heard about Dr. Dalton and his team's accomplishments, and we're interested in forming an alliance." Tina handed Stephen a business proposal outlining the construction of an ecological industrial park. If the total investment exceeded $2 billion, it would attract thousands of talents from various fields. If scientific research could be brought into the market, it could open up new industries and decrease the unemployment rate. In addition, the laboratories on Mirage Island were listed as territories under the Sovereign's command, and Dr. Dalton had access to numerous military projects. Tina's goal wasn't money, it was these projects. Stephen tactfully refused. "Dr. Dalton rarely has spare time for extra projects. His research is classified and cannot be marketed. I suggest you consider other private companies." Tina and Cade had expected his rejection. They moved on to their next proposal. "We've brought conventional weapons and equipment that we would like to trade with the U.S. We've brought cannon barrels with high wear resistance and sensitive glass lenses used to make night vision devices. Please take a look at the specific parameters." When it came to tanks, the cannon barrels were consumable items. The barrels would be damaged in the process of firing ammunition due to the high temperature, high pressure, and friction. Generally speaking, after approximately 200 rounds, tiny cracks would appear on the inside of the barrel. At that point, they would have to be discarded and replaced. If they weren't replaced in time, there would be a risk of an explosion. Silver Shield Corporation's products used special materials and forging techniques, which increased the number of rounds to 700. The same was true for the night vision detection glass. It reached a distance of 3 miles, and the edges of the images were clear, making it easier to aim and shoot. "Your proposal is promising," Stephen said. "But does the product match up to the description?" "We've prepared sample parts if you're interested. We just need to assemble, install, and test them." "All right, let's head to the training grounds on the outskirts of the city." Tina and Cade were confident. To gain a foothold in the U.S., they brought the company's most outstanding products. When everyone arrived at the training grounds, the engineers from Silver Shield Corporation got to work and assembled the new barrel on the tank. The artillery shell was loaded and fired in the direction of the shooting range. The training grounds went up in flames as muffled sounds of explosions sounded from a distance. It wasn't necessary for the tank to fire enough rounds to the extent of being scrapped. After 10 times, it was enough to check the degree of wear and tear inside. They waited for the barrel to cool down before it was put into the instrument for scanning. The infrared and ultrasonic waves analyzed the subtle changes in the internal structure of the metal material. Tina inspected the reading on the instrument. The technical analysis is the same as the data outlined in the proposal. Not bad, Stephen said. They say your company's products are the best in the industry. Seems like it's true. Thank you, Mr. Adams. However, our price is 10 times higher than the standard. The government's negotiators took over to negotiate pricing. Silver Shield Corporation used an advanced forging and smelting method to create unique products, and Tina and Cade didn't come all the way to the U.S. to do business. When the negotiations continued for a while without any real progress, Tina proposed an alternative. Why don't we set up a local weapons and equipment factory? The cost of raw materials, labor, transportation, and tariffs will be lowered, so the price will be within your desired range. If you forge your products here, aren't you concerned that your trade secrets will be leaked? Tina smiled at the negotiators. Monopolies don't last forever. At present, this is the best value for our business. Your heavy industry and related chains are one of the best. They'll be beneficial to producing our products. The staff relayed Tina's proposal to Stephen. The project required careful consideration, so he informed them that negotiations would end here for today. The Leviathan Unit's intelligence team took advantage of the delay to speed up their investigation on Silver Shield Corporation's senior executives. This was an important transaction, and if anything went wrong, the country would suffer heavy losses. Stephen had just returned to his office when the intelligence team sent him an aerial map from a satellite. According to data stored in the reconnaissance satellite, the cruise ship that Silver Shield Corporation arrived in made a stop on an uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean before sailing to the eastern port. That island was your previous target, and it's likely that the Silver Shield Corporation is the owner of the research institute that was destroyed. Stephen wasn't surprised to hear that. He had a strange feeling when he met Tina and Cade. I don't know if they're here to pick a fight or if they want to make money, but one thing's for sure. They have an ulterior motive. The productions of weapons and equipment would be useful for war. He might as well find a corner somewhere in the country for the Silver Shield Corporation to build a factory. For the project to begin, they would need to secure funds for the investment. There were many businesses and families in the U.S. who'd be interested in investing, but that would mean pulling out from other projects listed on the government's official website. Therefore, whether the project began or fell through would be the Silver Shield Corporation's decision to make. The negotiators understood what they needed to do. After a busy day, Stephen went home just in time for dinner with Kim and Valeria. The AI chip had been implanted inside Amber and Mitty, and they'd been transferred to a private location guarded by the military. The anesthesia hadn't worn off yet, and they had to wait before sending them back to Warhawk. The two scientists will wake up tomorrow morning, Nora reported. Are you just going to hand them over to Warhawk? Of course not, Stephen replied. We'll be exchanging them for money. Nor wasn't following his train of thought. There were widespread rumors that the U.S. had kidnapped Amber and Mitty. Asking for a hefty sum would confirm the gossip and paint the country in a bad light. If we do that, wouldn't we be admitting that our country kidnapped them? You'll find out when we reach the hospital. Later in the evening, Stephen and Nor left the villa and headed to the hospital to visit the elders and their students from the ancient martial arts factions. Days had passed since the incident with Tristan's tower. After an intensive treatment and recuperation, the students had almost made a full recovery. When Stephen entered the ward with Nor, the four elders stood up to greet him respectfully. It's getting late. What brings you here? There's no need to be so polite. We're technically friends who survived a life-or-death crisis together. Stephen's tone was friendly, and he bridged the gap between them with a few eloquent words. The elders felt like they were longtime friends, despite the large age gap. They'd been living in the mountains and forests for a long time, and their immunity to flattery was near zero. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Adams. If it weren't for you, we and our students might have lost our lives in that tower. We're almost recovered, so we plan to leave the city soon. Why are you in such a hurry? Stephen asked. Is there an emergency back home? The elders shook their heads. They didn't want to say it out loud, but they weren't used to the hustle and bustle of the big city. Stephen didn't know if he would ever see them again after they left, so he made a request. I want to hold an auction, but it's not convenient for me to be the host. It'd be great if you could lend me a hand. The elders were quick to agree. They still needed to repay Stephen for saving their lives, but this was only a small request, and it couldn't be considered repaying him at all. Even so, they would help him to the best of their ability. It was an easy task to be security guards for one day and ensure his auction ended without a hitch. That won't be difficult. Please let us know the time and place, and we'll be there. With their agreement, Stephen and Noor began to make arrangements for the auction. The customs department was tasked with preparing an inconspicuous ship. The transaction would take place in the middle of the Vergless Strait. The climate was cold and harsh. There were frequent storms, and whirlpools ravaged the tumultuous waters. If one wasn't careful, they would be buried in the depths of the chilly seawater. According to Stephen's instructions, the Leviathan Unit's intelligence team posted this information on international websites under an anonymous user. Monetary transactions leave traces, Stephen said to the intelligence team. They're not ideal for this auction. It was important for them to erase traces of the United States' involvement in Amber and Mitty's disappearance. The Leviathan Unit's intelligence team bombarded Stephen with questions. How will we collect the money? After the conflict at the northern border, there are many countries that haven't lifted the ban on our currency. Its circulation is limited. And what price should we set for an auction of 2 people? We've never held this kind of auction before. They lacked experience in this department, and they were concerned about messing up Stephen's plan. But he wasn't worried. He already had an idea of how to go about it. The auction would be successful and more convenient without monetary transactions. They would use the most primitive and confidential method, trading with items. We'll be asking for plutonium. It's a radioactive chemical metal. It's priced at $4,000 per gram in Warhawk's currency. Whoever's interested in participating in the auction will only need to report their stock and confirm the prices according to the weight. Plutonium is a valuable industrial raw material regardless of whether it's in circulation or used for personal interests. It can function as a nuclear fission agent. Private businesses don't have the expertise or sufficient equipment to extract the metal. Exclude these participants and make sure Amber and Mitty return to Warhawk. The team was floored by Stephen's wisdom. Trading with plutonium maintained confidentiality and verified the participants' qualifications. Various organizations were stirred after this information was released. Photos of Amber and Mitty were made available. Everyone knew who they were at first glance. They were the 2 missing scientists from Warhawk. Whichever country had them in their custody could achieve a major breakthrough in the biochemical field. Harris and Brent were woken up in the middle of the night by a phone call from Warhawk's higher-ups. They were scolded the moment they picked up. Amber and Mitty will be publicly auctioned. Did you not know about this? You 2 haven't made any progress on your mission. Did you travel to some other country and not the U.S.? We followed the members from the International Medical and Health Association to the northern border to investigate the virus outbreak, Harris explained. We're trying to avoid drawing attention to ourselves in Annapolis. The United States' hit list had been updated, and the top 10 wanted criminals were no longer fugitives who'd escaped from the Seven Stars prison. Stephen had contained the crisis, and Harris and Brent were worried about their own safety. They were in foreign territory, and the Sovereign could get rid of them at a moment's notice. Moreover, now that they'd lost contact with the man in black, there was even less of a chance to investigate. Warhawk's higher-ups didn't have the time to listen to their excuses. They hung up without another word. At this time, the Parliament building in Warhawk was brightly lit. Senior members and relatives belonging to different factions were gathered to have an emergency meeting. The large screen at the front of the hall displayed information about the auction. The head senator, Merrill, and the head secretary, Hilskin, had frowns on their faces. Hilskin cleared his throat and began the meeting. The auction will be held in the middle of the ocean at the Vergless Straits the day after tomorrow at 10 p.m. There are less than 48 hours left. Is there a possibility of rescuing the 2 scientists by force? Everyone lowered their heads, avoiding eye contact. The host of the auction was anonymous, but it was obvious that the U.S. was behind it. Harris and Brent's failure was laid out in the open, and going against the U.S. was like jumping into a fire pit. After a long silence, one representative voiced a different suggestion. Radical methods won't help us achieve our goal. If we act without thinking, we'll become a target for the auction's participants. There are many countries interested in Warhawk's biochemical technology. It's a given that they'll be sending their people to participate. Are you suggesting we abide by the rules? Hilskin demanded. What I mean is, our best shot is to suffer some losses in exchange for the two scientists. In a competition of wealth, who can match up to our country? Hilskin glanced at Merrill. This was the only option, and the two of them had to make the humiliating decision. Merrill ordered the Maritime Defense Force to send out warships to investigate the situation at the Vergless Strait. Even if they couldn't initiate conflict, they could at least pressure the other participants. Hilsking arranged for a shipment of plutonium. He didn't know how much their competitors would bid, so he had to prepare. The world powers reacted in one night's time. Warships gathered at the Vergless Strait, and factories from all over began to refine plutonium. The entire world was fixated on the auction, and it was impossible for any new arrivals to escape one's scrutiny. The information the U.S. released served to draw the world's attention to the real location of the auction. The transaction would take place on a submarine. On the night of the auction, Stephen led the elders and their students to the port where the submarine was waiting. Feel free to take a look around. We'll be departing soon. The elders and their students were brimming with anticipation. Regardless of how high their cultivation was, not just anyone would have the opportunity to ride in a submarine. It was a rare life experience. They turned to Stephen with excited looks on their faces. We can set off now, they urged. With us around, the auction will be a success. Stephen was confused by their sudden enthusiasm, but he didn't comment. All right then, let's go. The submarine submerged in the depths of the ocean, and they were off. Stephen was planning on pretending to be a participant in the auction to raise the bid. Warhawk was wealthy, and the two scientists were from their country. They would stop at nothing to get them back. Seeing Warhawk spend a fortune would be inexplicably satisfying. At the Vergless Strait, dark clouds hung overhead, and waves over 100 feet high were common sightings. This was a border between two regions of opposite climates. The humid and chilly temperatures clashed, making the water restless all year round. It wasn't easy for warships to travel through the Vergless Strait, let alone ordinary commercial ships. Their respective crews cursed their superiors. Out of so many people, why did they have to be chosen to participate in the auction? Before Stephen set off with his team, the radars at the eastern port had scanned the ships gathering at the Vergless Strait. There were more of them than he expected. Maybe he should have chosen a rarer metal. A weather forecast of the region was sent to the crew on the submarine. A storm was coming. They advised Stephen to change the location of the auction. Let's wait for the storm to pass before making a decision. The weaker ships will withdraw when they realize the danger, but Warhawk will stay no matter what. That's enough for us. Amber and Mitty had returned to Warhawk to fulfill their duty as spies. The two of them were on board the submarine in a separate room, and they were oblivious to the chips implanted in their brains. The clouds thickened, and thunder rumbled in the distance. At midnight, a flash of lightning cut through the night sky. Stephen observed the screen displaying the situation above the water. Some of the ships had been struck by lightning. No matter how advanced technology had gotten, civilization was defenseless against nature. The ships weren't here to carry out missions, so they hadn't brought that much ammunition with them. Fortunately for them, the lightning didn't set off a chain of explosions. We predict the storm will last until 4 a.m. We'll be heading back to land at 10 o'clock in the morning. The crew urged Stephen to take a break, but he turned them down. He was prepared for a lengthy auction. Aside from a few unlucky warships that were forced to withdraw, everybody else held on. He only brought Trey, Wes, and Aston with him. The other preparations were handled by the Marine Corps stationed at the port. The long-range missile had locked on to the Vergless Strait, ready to launch a precise attack with the reconnaissance satellite when necessary. A Marine squadron was on standby, and if the auction went south, they would take action immediately. Their submarine surfaced a distance away from the storm. Stephen stood on the deck and watched as the skies began to clear after the heavy wind and rain. Trey was concerned that a fight would break out. Fighting on the ocean was different from fighting on land. Aside from the opponent, there was also a complicated environment to look out for. If they fell into the water, their blood would attract the deep-sea creatures. They'd be torn apart before they realized what was happening. We're about to enter the Vergless Strait. Should we maintain a distance from the other ships? Don't worry, Stephen said. The other ships are far from the mainland. They won't make any reckless moves for the sake of their own safety. Warhawk's authority has been diminishing ever since the conflict at the northern border settled down. That's why so many participants showed up. With this many participants, Stephen didn't think he would need to raise the price by that much. The participants would do the work for him while fighting to the death. Right after the storm cleared, Stephen moved from the submarine to the deck of the ship. When the skies were clear, a black submarine surfaced in the middle of the Vergless Strait. Every ship in the area received a radio command. Those attending the auction must board the designated helicopter and descend onto the submarine from a rope ladder. The sudden change threw a wrench in the participants' plans. If the auction was held on a ship, they could receive instructions from their superiors. But the interior of a submarine blocked communications. They'd have to rely on their quick thinking. After some contemplation, the participants decided to bite the bullet and follow the rules. The helicopter picked Stephen up first and took him back to the submarine to make it seem like he was a participant representing the U.S. The other participants followed suit and gathered below the submarine's deck. The 4 elders from the ancient martial arts factions welcomed them to the auction. Beside them was a large iron cage. Amber and Mitty were seated on chairs inside. When they saw a familiar face, they called out to him in a low voice. "Mr. Hilskin, when can we go home? We don't even know what's going on." Hilskin gritted his teeth. He felt an urge to slaughter every participant there. "We'll negotiate your freedom. No matter what price we have to pay, we'll make sure you return safely. Calm down for now and wait for the results." Stephen pretended to be interested and walked over. "Aren't you Mr. Hilskin, the famous head secretary of Warhawk's Parliament? I wasn't expecting you to join in the fun. Let me give you a word of advice. Keep your bragging to yourself unless you want to be humiliated later." His voice was loud in the isolated space. The other participants looked over. They didn't take Warhawk seriously. Some of them began to mock Hilskin and the higher-up from Warhawk who was there with him. Good things should be shared. Your country's biochemical technology has been developing quite well. Why not let these 2 outstanding talents travel the world and help other countries advance? That's right, their knowledge can save people. Warhawk is so focused on conflict and war. You need to take a step back and think about the bigger picture. The auction had yet to officially begin, but the participants were already coming after them. Hilskin was not in a good mood. Most of the participants there hadn't joined the conflict at the northern border. Those countries had suffered a huge blow from the crushing defeat and couldn't afford to participate. Stephen gave the elders a meaningful look, and they got down to business. They announced the beginning of the auction and briefly introduced Amber and Mitty. A detailed explanation wasn't necessary because all of the participants knew who they were. The starting bid is 10 kilograms. Each gram of plutonium metal was worth 4,000 in Warhawk's currency, which was the equivalent to a starting bid of 40 million. Before anyone had a chance to comment on the high price, Hilskin had already raised his plate. 12 kilograms. The other participants chimed in. 15 kilograms. 20 kilograms. 23 kilograms. The 4 elders hadn't mentioned plutonium in their introduction, so Amber and Mitty didn't know what these weights referred to, but they hoped Warhawk's people would bid the highest amount. Stephen casually leaned back in his seat as he watched the auction unfold. He'd called out his bid once and didn't say anything else. The atmosphere was heated, and the price rose to astronomical heights. "A portion of Warhawk's wealth comes from the mines," Stephen pointed out in a loud voice. "Feel free to raise the price as much as you want." Hilskin and the higher-up from Warhawk were close to blowing their top, but they couldn't do anything but shoot him a glare. After 10 minutes of back and forth, Amber was exchanged for 220 kilograms. This bid belonged to Hilskin, and it was equivalent to 880 million in Warhawk's currency. Based on the current exchange rate, this number would be multiplied by 10 when converted into USD. Stephen congratulated Hilskin. That was a good bet. What about the other scientists? Will you let her go and share her talents with the rest of the world? Hilskin felt his blood pressure rising. He was about to explode. Plutonium had to be refined before it could be used, and 220 grams of it was an astounding amount. This was a huge loss for Warhawk, and this wasn't even the end. The second auction began. This time, the participants would be bidding for MIDI. The bid reached 200 kilograms in no time at all. Warhawk's wealth couldn't have been emptied after just one bid, so the participants didn't hesitate to raise the prices. When Stephen called out a bid of 220 kilograms, it was quickly surpassed by other bids. Warhawk's higher-up was afraid that Hilskin would make a large bid to win MIDI back. Don't be impulsive. The reduction in plutonium will affect our industrial chains and production of weapons. Hilskin had no choice. This wasn't a situation he could back down from. I have to bring them back to Warhawk to salvage our reputation. If we lose this auction, the world will think we're weak. It hasn't been that long since our defeat at the northern border. That loss is dragging us down. If we give in here, our allies will cancel our alliance. Sacrificing one of the scientists would lead to a whole chain of reactions that Warhawk wouldn't be able to handle. The reduction in the plutonium supply could be resolved through overseas trade and slow processing and refinement. Hilskin made another bid, 300 kilograms. All of the participants fell silent, except for Stephen. At this critical moment, he raised his plate. 330 kilograms. Warhawk's higher-up threw him a warning look. Don't misunderstand. The conflict at the northern border was temporarily diffused. The U.S. wiped out a fraction of their enemy's forces. They didn't destroy them. If another battle breaks out, what raw materials will your country have to forge high-end weapons? Stephen pointed to his subordinate beside him. If the U.S. wins the auction for Dr. Mitty, my colleague will be building a research institute with our country's allies and share the knowledge. Those who are interested are welcome to join us. The other participants who'd lost hope started talking at the same time. Spending a small amount of money for a greater ambition was the best outcome. Those who were interested in allying themselves with the U.S. called out the amounts they were willing to contribute to jack up the price. I'll support the U.S. with 20 kilograms. Me too. I'll support them with 35 kilograms. In a short period of time, the U.S. had gained many more allies, and the bid had significantly increased. This turn of events was beyond Hilskin's expectations. He turned to the four elders to question them. This is clearly a violation of the rules. Aren't you going to stop them? If everyone bands together, what's the point in holding an auction? The elders didn't care about the trivialities. They'd come here expecting to be security guards, but being the hosts wasn't bad either. The rules were up to Stephen, and he hadn't signaled for them to speak up, so the participants were free to do whatever they wanted. We held this auction for money. The rules are a formality. If you don't bid soon, Dr. Mitty will be sold to the U.S. Another intense round of bidding ensued. If Mitty fell into another country's hands, Warhawk's biochemical technology would be free knowledge for the rest of the world. Hilskin couldn't let that happen. He bid 400 kilograms, then 500 kilograms. At the end of the auction, Warhawk won the bid at a whopping 600 kilograms. This was equivalent to $2.4 billion in their currency, which was 3 times more than what they had bid for amber. The elders hammered the podium enthusiastically, signaling the end of the bidding. Next on the agenda was the transaction. Warhawk's ship lowered a crate of plutonium into the ocean, and the submarine salvage equipment retrieved it with a net. The staff carried out radioactive measurements and cutting tests to ensure that another metal hadn't been mixed in with the plutonium. While the staff inspected the crates, food and wine was served to the participants. Amber and Mitty finally calmed down. They were one step away from going home. Stephen took a glass of wine and walked around the venue, striking up a conversation with the participants. Even if he didn't win the auction, he'd managed to win some popularity. It's a shame we couldn't share their knowledge with everyone. Warhawk is as stingy as the rumors. They wanted to maintain their position on the pedestal and benefit in every situation. The participants agreed. Biochemical technology is nothing special. It doesn't play an active role in war. The key to victory lies in the aircrafts and cannons. After the auction, we'll report this to our superiors and suggest limiting the trade of precious metals in the international market and let Warhawk experience the feeling of lacking resources. Hillskin's bid had incited anger among the public, but there was nothing he could do about it. He sat with his companion at a table in the corner and waited for the inspection to be over. After an hour, Amber and Mitty were finally released. They walked out of the cage with tears in their eyes. "The transaction's been completed," Hillskin said to the elders. "Can we leave now? There are a few more things to take care of before the submarine resurfaces. It won't take long." The elders gestured to the staff, who brought out more items for the auction. These items weren't in the announcement, but they piqued the participants' interest. The display case contained several test tubes with a pale blue liquid inside. The potion was ready for experimentation. It was a genuine product. There were relevant documents that could be ordered separately. Experimental procedures were recorded, but it wasn't complete. Stephen didn't plan on exposing the entirety of Warhawk's biochemical research. His goal was to maintain the United States' position by intimidating them. "Those belong to our country," the higher-up from Warhawk protested. "Leaking our research is highly inappropriate." The elders shrugged. "Warhawk is filthy rich. Why not just buy everything back?" Stephen didn't care who won the bid. In any case, the money would be going to the U.S. regardless of the winner. After an intense round of bidding, some of the items were bought by the other participants, not from Warhawk. Even Stephen didn't expect the auction to be this successful. Warhawk had lost a significant amount of money. The elders warmly congratulated the participants as the submarine ascended to the surface. Stephen shook his head. "Harris and Brent are with the delegation team at the northern border. It's time to deal with them. We need to come up with a reasonable explanation for the virus outbreak." When the submarine returned to the eastern port, Stephen boarded a plane with Wes and Aston and headed to the northern lands. The harsh weather at the border and the minimal hospitality made it hard for the delegation team to investigate. The guards at the border were in charge of their food, clothing, and accommodations. The team wouldn't be able to leave at a moment's notice, even if they wanted to. Jerome had brought his people to the airport to welcome Stephen back to the northern lands. "Mr. Adams, are you here for another inspection? It just so happens we're almost done rebuilding our defenses. Would you like me to take you there?" After the chaotic battle at the northern border, Jerome had been diligently carrying out his responsibilities. With a considerable amount of investment and assembly of construction teams, the remote city was on the road to becoming a large-scale commercial city. "There's no need for that," Stephen replied. "I have faith in your abilities. I'm here for Warhawk's delegation team." Jerome led Stephen to the command center and gave him the investigation reports. The delegation team hadn't made much progress. "I've sent my people to monitor their team 24 hours a day," Jerome said. "The terrain is difficult, and it's not easy for them to travel. They haven't gained much useful information." Jerome had specifically arranged areas of interest for the delegation team to investigate. These places included deserts, swamps, and steep mountains. Harris and Brent were the first to give up. They spent their days cooped up in a simple and crude guest house, eating and drinking. Their main pastime was scrolling on their phones. News of the auction's results had already spread, and it made them dejected. Stephen led his team to the guest house to meet Harris and Brent. "You've traveled thousands of miles from home to investigate the virus outbreak. It's been hard on all of you. Your investigation will be completed soon. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to everyone before you leave." Harris, Brent, and their delegation team were bewildered. Most of the patients infected with the virus were from the multi-country Allied Army, and after the conflict, they were either dead or had retreated. There were no leads, so they hadn't made any real progress on their investigation. "There's no rush, Mr. Adams," Harris said. "An investigation requires patience." Stephen chuckled. "It seems like you're aware of your limitations. Your investigation has reached a dead end. Who do you think you're fooling?" The delegation team was at a loss for words, especially the members of the International Medical and Health Association. They had no say in front of the sovereign. Their association was neutral, and they relied on Harris and Brent's backing to be here. Stephen handed them a stack of documents he'd prepared. It contained Warhawk's biochemical technology. As you know, I represented the U.S. and attended the auction a few days ago. The items that were auctioned proves that the virus outbreak was closely related to Dr. Amber and Dr. Mitty's research. I believe that's the answer you're looking for. You may now hold a press conference and inform the public of your investigation. Harris and Brent immediately expressed their objections to his accusation. In the biochemical field, it was natural for the research of various countries to be similar. The virus outbreak was caused by the leader of Vindictus, who'd purchased the virus from a research institute on an island in the Pacific Ocean owned by Silver Shield Corporation. The two of them couldn't let Warhawk take the blame. Mr. Adams, let's not jump to conclusions, Harris argued. What do you mean we've found our answer? There are many countries around the world with similar research. We are one step ahead, but that doesn't mean we're the culprit. You're accusing us of causing the virus outbreak to tarnish our reputation, Brent added. Stephen had predicted their excuses. It doesn't matter what you say. We've done our own investigation, and this is the evidence. Stephen instructed his team to open the door. Reporters from the media walked in and prepared for the interview. Harris and Brent were dragged out of the room and taken to a secluded location with the excuse of them being too worked up for the interview and needing some time to cool down. The remaining members of the delegation team were suppressed by Stephen's aura. They were too afraid to resist. They stood in front of the camera and the microphone and announced the results of the investigation according to his instructions. The international media broadcasted the interview one after another, and pretty soon, Warhawk became known as the schemer of the century. Stephen stood outside the guest house with Jerome. They were both anticipating Harris and Brent's departure from the country. Warhawk had lost a significant amount of plutonium, and the reputation had taken a heavy blow. Even if they had Amber and Mitty back, their losses were far more than their gains. With a major world power on the decline, their allies would consequently be weakened, and peace would be restored for the time being. What's the situation at the border? Stephen asked. Their neighboring countries were rebuilding their defenses, and they would need to monitor them closely. Who knew when they would conspire again in secret? We're keeping a close eye on them, Jerome said. I can arrange for a team to carry out combat exercises to discourage them from joining forces again. Conflicts consume resources. That's not the best method. I'll arrange a team of diplomats to have a chat with the neighboring countries. If we can't reach an agreement, that's when we'll show our strength. Harris, Brent, and their delegation team were of no use after the press conference. Stephen had someone pack their bags, send their team to the airport, and get them on a plane back to Warhawk. Stephen wasn't far behind them. He took a plane back to Annapolis. After several days of negotiations, the senior executives of Silver Shield Corporation had conceded to building a factory in the U.S. Stephen chose an area to the north of the eastern port. An industrial park had been built there, so it would make things more convenient for the company. At this time, the middle management of Silver Shield Corporation was holding a meeting at the hotel. Everyone expressed their doubts. From a commercial point of view, they didn't think building a factory in the U.S. was a wise investment decision. Tina patiently explained her reasoning. The sovereign didn't go all out during the auction. This means he doesn't care about Warhawk's biochemical technology. He might have already obtained their research through some other means. It's also possible that Dr. Dalton's team has achieved a breakthrough that can rival Warhawk's. Tina's aim had shifted from these two possibilities. They didn't care about getting back at the U.S. for destroying their research institute anymore. The loss of one island wasn't that big of a deal. Their efforts would be rewarded if they got their hands on the country's biochemical technology, and to make that happen, they would need a reason to stay in the U.S. for a prolonged period of time. The sovereign has control over multiple industries, someone argued. And your intelligence network is lacking in information. How long will it take to get what you want? We can't stay here forever. I'm not forcing anyone to stay. If you're worried about your safety, feel free to leave the country whenever you want. No one could refute Tina's words. Being afraid of death was equivalent to losing their jobs. If they left the country, who knew when they would be kicked out of the company? Harry and Rebecca were fulfilling their responsibilities and sending information to Tina and Cade. They were monitoring the ocean surrounding Mirage Island and counting the number of ships coming and going. Dr. Dalton was just as valuable as Amber and Mitty. As a last resort, Tina planned to kidnap him. A thorough interrogation would give them the knowledge they were looking for. After the meeting, Tina and Cade went to the industrial area to the north of the eastern port. The land had been prepared for construction. Harry and Rebecca were waiting for them, eager to get a piece of the pie. Tina wasn't happy to see them. "You two are quite well informed, considering how little information you've given us." Harry was in a difficult position. Mirage Island was heavily guarded by the military, and he didn't have the courage to get information from the soldiers. The second news of him sneaking around reached Stephen, he would be labeled as a spy. "Miss Tina, you have to understand that we have our own difficulties. Stephen doesn't have a good impression of the Cassidy family." "It can't be helped if you can't get close to Mirage Island. Investigate Dr. Dalton's relatives instead. They're probably living somewhere that's isolated from the world. No one has heard of them before." Tina's new mission was like finding a needle in a haystack for Harry and Rebecca. It was likely that the officials had modified Dr. Dalton's family information and provided an inconspicuous place for them to live. There was a chance they weren't in Annapolis. Harry and Rebecca braced themselves for another difficult mission and agreed. If they succeeded, they would receive a share of the factory's profits. While they were devising a plan, another hostile force had already made their move. In the evening, the Leviathan unit's intelligence team reported to Stephen in a fluster. Tristan had disappeared. "Isn't he at the training grounds? Did someone rile him up and he left for a spar?" Stephen doubted that something happened to Tristan. With his cultivation base and martial arts, he was free to roam the world. That was what he did during ancient times when martial artists were far stronger. There were very few people in contemporary times who could threaten him. After Tristan went missing, the Leviathan unit had searched his belongings for any clues. He didn't have anything except for a change of clothes, and they were simple and ordinary. Furthermore, there were no signs of a fight anywhere on the training grounds. Before he went missing, he asked for a bottle of fine wine and a meal from a famous chef. He didn't look like he had any intention of leaving. Stephen was just as stumped as the Leviathan unit. Maybe he came across an item that caught his eye, and he wanted to add it to his collection. Ask the local police for any recent theft cases. The Leviathan unit still had no progress after visiting the local police station. There were 0 clues. They couldn't waste all their time and energy on Tristan, so they left it at that. Meanwhile, a worn-out tank truck drove down the highway and headed towards the mountain range in the northeast direction. The truck didn't carry any fuel. Instead, there were chains attached to the interior with hanging paper runes decorated with inscriptions made from cinnabar. Tristan was bound to the chains. The runes absorbed his inner energy every time he attempted to use a technique. 3 figures stood on top of the truck, peering through the circular lid and laughing at Tristan's struggle. The man in a black robe was among their group. "Remember what you stole from me? I'll make you compensate with your life." Tristan's martial arts were unorthodox, but they weren't suited for combat. He was no match for them when they ganged up on him. "Taking advantage of your numbers to sneak up behind me doesn't make you any better. You're just trash from ancient martial arts factions. Sooner or later, I'm going to kill all of you." The man didn't answer. He activated his talisman, and the runes emitted a dim glow. Electrical currents from the chains surged towards Tristan, making him writhe in pain. It felt like thousands of poisonous insects were gnawing at his skin, and he was powerless to resist. But he wouldn't give in. He would protect his collection of treasures with his life. Whether you tell me now or later doesn't matter. I have plenty of time to play with you. Keeping your mouth shut will only lead to more suffering before you die. The man in the black robe closed the lid of the truck. His attire was similar to his 2 companions. The only difference was the embroidery. Their robes were decorated with dragons, phoenixes, tigers, leopards, and other beasts. The three of them were from a martial arts faction known as the Tribulation Sect. Their embroidered robes were a symbol of their faction's strength. The only time they opted for different attire was when they were in need to disguise themselves. "Have you confirmed that Tristan has the sacred manual in his possession?" one of them asked. "It's hard to tell," the man said. "He's stolen a lot of treasures in his lifetime." He suspected that the manual was in Tristan's collection, but he couldn't be sure of anything until there was proof. He had been searching for the manual for years, but he hadn't found any leads. At this point, he wouldn't be surprised if the sacred manual turned out to be an unreliable legend passed down in his faction. The previous leaders of the Tribulation Sect had treated the search for the sacred manual as a supreme mission. They'd practically dug up 3 feet of land from every continent. "I originally thought Hellcrown Palace had the manual, and they stored it in the 7 Stars prison. But when I instigated a riot at the prison, I couldn't find any trace of the manual. The palace is a powerful organization, but they didn't have any heritage. They didn't even know what the sacred manual was." The man didn't think highly of the U.S., but his actions at the 7 Stars prison hadn't stemmed from hatred. In the face of a mission, personal grudges were insignificant. His companions weren't interested in the details. As long as they succeeded in extracting information from Tristan, this wouldn't be a wasted trip. As the truck sped along the highway, the man sensed a familiar aura from the hillside. He ordered the driver to stop and pull over. His companions gave him a pointed look. "Why are we stopping here?" "I sense a member of an ancient martial arts faction." "So what? If you want to deal with them, do it on your own. Catch up to us later." The man nodded and leaped into the forest, while the truck sped towards the north. The 2 martial artists hurrying through the forest were internal members from the Spectre Cemetery and the Bloodfiend Valley. They were the same representatives who'd participated in Tristan's challenge and survived a life-and-death crisis in the tower through sheer luck. The 4 elders had promised Stephen that they would bring him ancient texts on talismans. After the auction, the students returned to their territories to find the related texts. They were efficient and worked fast. They compiled a stack of books in less than a week, and 2 of them were on the way back to Annapolis to personally deliver them to Stephen. While they were speeding through the dark forest, they didn't feel the need to hide their auras. No one was around anyway, and the last thing they'd expected was for someone to target them. A blade of light cut through the forest and sliced a tree in half. The 2 internal members leaped back to avoid the toppling tree. They noticed the man in a black robe standing not too far away and threw out their swords, aiming for his neck. The man blocked them with his talismans. The swords flew in a different direction and targeted his back, but the talismans swerved through the air and deflected them. "You 2 look like you're in a rush. Why don't we sit down and have a chat?" He noticed their backpacks, and he was curious as to what was inside. The internal members scoffed. "We weren't expecting to meet someone from the Tribulation Sect in the wilderness. What's your identity?" "You can tell where I'm from. You 2 aren't ordinary either, it seems." The man's talisman flickered and burst in midair, resulting in an explosion that swept the forest. All of the trees in the area collapsed. The internal members protected themselves with a shield of inner energy, but the vibration threw their energy into disarray, preventing it from circulating and condensing. The man was too strong, and they didn't stand a chance against him. The 2 of them shared a look, and with a nod, they took off running towards the highway. But the man was 1 step faster. A talisman tore into the back of the member from the Spectre Cemetery. The Bloodfiend Valley member deflected the rest of the incoming attacks and carried his injured partner to the highway at high speed. He weaved through the traffic with ease. At the same time, he utilized his faction's illusion technique. His red mist condensed into a human figure, throwing the man off their tail. "Hang in there. We're almost in the city. The military is guarding the gates. They're the Sovereign's people." The Spectre Cemetery's member's muscles in his back had torn from the talisman. The pain was excruciating, but he still had it in him to sigh. "I just left the hospital, and now I'm going back. This is a sign that I should have stayed home." "Be grateful you're alive," the Bloodfiend Valley member said. "At least we've discovered the man's identity. Members of the Tribulation Sect are mysterious and cruel." Stephen was having dinner with Kim and Valeria when Noor rushed into the house. "Mr. Adams, 2 of the elders' students are in the hospital. One of them is heavily injured." Stephen suspected the countries that participated in the auction. Perhaps they were holding a grudge, or they were trying to force the true host out of hiding. "What happened? Is someone after them?" "I didn't have time to ask before they were taken to the ICU." "Okay, let's go to the hospital." Stephen gave Kim and Valeria a goodbye hug and left the villa with Noor. The Leviathan unit had rushed to the forest where the fight had taken place to search for the culprit, but it wasn't an easy investigation because the internal members hadn't told them that much. It hadn't been long since the internal members met Stephen, and they couldn't recognize anyone familiar in the military or the Leviathan unit. Not everyone was of equal rank. The man in the black robe's identity was classified, and they couldn't reveal confidential information to just anyone. The Bloodfiend Valley member waited until Stephen arrived to tell him the details. "It's the second time I've run into him. You need to be careful when dealing with him. Members of the Tribulation sect are not that simple. Their goals aren't limited to power and wealth." He handed Stephen 2 backpacks. There were ancient texts made of sheepskin and leather inside. The elders had told Stephen the history of talismans some time ago, and these ancient texts recorded the improvements the Tribulation sect had made to the talisman over the years. The origin of the talisman started with the Sacred Manual. When ancient martial artists progressed to a certain point in their cultivation, they were thought to have reached the level of ascension. They called it the Immortal Ascension, also known as the Immortal Realm. Those who reached this stage were called Ascenders. The Sacred Manual was written by several Ascenders before they left the world. It was divided into 3 books. The Book of Heavens recorded the world's natural phenomenon, including the changes in the stars and the weather. It also included information about basic elements such as metal, earth, water, fire, and ice. There was a comprehensive list of their combinations and attributes. The Book of Life recorded changes in the oceans, land, skies, and evolution of all living creatures. The Book of Destiny was the most peculiar. Whoever opened the book would see their fate laid out across the pages. One's destiny was set in stone. It couldn't be altered. When the 3 books were together, it was known as the Sacred Manual. Every word from the owner of the manual was equivalent to the natural laws of the world. A physical battle was unnecessary for the owner because one word could reduce their opponent's life force to 0. As Stephen flipped through the text and read about the Sacred Manual, he was skeptical of its existence. "Is this real? It sounds like a myth." The Bloodfiend Valley members believed in its existence. This was the perspective shared by the ancient martial arts factions. The Tribulation sect was established to collect the 3 books. According to legend, their faction's founder was the only one who was fortunate enough to read one of the books. He attempted to record the content, but no paper could handle the strange, destructive force behind the text. In the end, he chose to carve it on a metal plate. This became the origin of the talismans. Stephen finally understood why his previous encounters with the mysterious man were always dangerous and ended in a draw. The ancient text didn't record martial arts techniques or methods to counter talismans. He would have to figure that out on his own. After an emergency operation, the condition of the internal member from the Spectre Cemetery was stabilized. The doctor came out of the ward to give Stephen his assessment. The blow to his back tore his muscles and damaged his heart and lungs. Fortunately, he's past the critical stage. However, I don't know how long it'll take to make a full recovery. Stephen thanked the doctor and sent his subordinate to inform the Spectre Cemetery faction about the member's hospitalization. He could already imagine the ancient martial arts faction's large-scale manhunt for the man in a black robe. At least they had a common enemy this time. Later in the evening, Stephen had someone arrange accommodations for the 2 internal members before heading home. Valeria was already asleep. Kim was in her pajamas, cuddling into Stephen's side on the bed as she listened to his story about recent events. Hearing about the Sacred Manual dispelled her drowsiness. Whether it's written on animal skins, paper, or even stones, books are still books. Your best bet is to ask Tristan, but he's gone missing. Her perspective helped Stephen connect the dots. Tristan had mysteriously disappeared. Maybe the tribulation sect kidnapped him for information on the secret manual's whereabouts. This was not a simple battle with the man in black alone. His fellow members and the elders of his faction might already be on the move. Our enemy is in the dark, and we're in the open. The tribulation sect knows much more than we do. They've been trying to track down the manual for years. Kim considered using money to search the clues. Their company, finances, and extensive network gave them an advantage. She didn't know how powerful the tribulation sect was, but their connections in the outside wouldn't compare to Stephen's. I'll ask the cultural media department at Skyreach Corporation to find and purchase books from around the world. Whether it's the original, translation, or electric version, if it was purchased, there has to be a record. The sacred manual won't be mixed in with regular books. Its contents contain a special power. There's almost no parchment in this world that can withstand it. It's fine if nothing turns up. We can use this as bait to lure your enemies out of hiding. Stephen had a flash of inspiration. He patted Kim's head. Her plan was brilliant. A leading enterprise purchasing a large amount of books just might catch the tribulation sect's attention. They'll send their people to investigate. At that time, both sides would be out in the open, and their chances of catching them would be much higher. The elite members of the Palace, Leviathan Unit, the military, as well as the ancient martial arts factions. With this many forces working together, how could they not be a match for the tribulation sect? In a dark and damp cave, Tristan had been tortured to the brink of death, but the man and his fellow faction members didn't plan on letting him go. A treasure's value has no meaning over death. Can't you understand such a simple concept in your old age? Hand it over and we'll let you live. Reaching the Divine Grandmaster realm required a great deal of patience. During the cultivation process, one's state of mind is strengthened as it familiarizes itself with suffering. It wasn't a simple task to break a Divine Grandmaster's mind. In Tristan's case, if they attacked him with too much strength, he would die. But if it was too little, it would have no effect. The three of them felt like their skills were being put to the test. Tristan panted heavily, barely hanging on to consciousness. It took him a long time to form a sentence. Is this how you ask someone for help? If you want me to cooperate, bring me wine and meat. Then get on your knees and beg me. If I'm in a good mood, I'll reward you with a few of my treasures. The man and his companions were livid. If they didn't need Tristan's help, they would have torn him to pieces and tossed him into the wilderness already. You can't delay the inevitable just by keeping your mouth shut. There are drugs that can alter the mind, which means that martial arts techniques with a similar effect also exist. Don't think we won't use them. Tristan had roamed the world for a lifetime, and he knew they were telling the truth. The gears in his mind were turning, trying to find a way to escape. To protect the treasures he'd painstakingly collected for years, he'd chosen a special location to store them. After a pause, he pretended to meet their demands. We can talk this out. You just want something from my collection, right? I can give you 1 or 2 items. They're stored in a tower. You've seen it before. It's the key to opening the treasury. I need to hold it in my hand. When the three of them captured Tristan, they searched his clothes, but there were no miniature tower on his person. Where is it? The man demanded. It's in a safe at the training grounds. Only I can open it. Tristan was hoping to lure them back to the city to alert Stephen and get him to deal with them. The man and his companions couldn't confirm if Tristan was lying or telling the truth, but they couldn't let an important clue like this go. After a brief discussion amongst themselves, they decided to take Tristan back to Annapolis and sneak into the training grounds. One of them placed a yellow talisman on Tristan's chest. It melted like a snowflake and seeped into his skin. Don't do anything stupid. If you circulate your inner energy, your internal organs will burst, and you'll turn into a pool of blood. The chains shackling Tristan to the cave also disappeared. He examined his external injuries. Give me a medicinal pill. I'm old. Torture's too much for me. The man and his companions muttered under their breath, but they still handed him the pill. Tristan's external injuries and the pain faded, but his condition didn't improve. It was better than nothing, At least he still had a shot at retaliation once he found their weakness. The man and his companions noticed patrol vehicles on the road. The logo belonged to the local police department. "Like I thought," the man said. "Those two martial artists I found in the forest are Stephen's allies. He knows we're here and he's searching for us." His companions guessed that the city was under martial law, so it would be better to wait in the cave until dawn. Early the next morning, Stephen's subordinates reported that they hadn't found any traces of the man in black robes. He'd expected this. "It's fine if you can't find them. Focus on guarding the institutions affiliated with the government, especially the hospital." "Should we include them on the hit list?" "No, we don't know much about them." It wasn't wise to provoke a faction they knew nothing about. Not to mention, the Leviathan unit didn't have evidence of their crimes. Things would get complicated if this issue was blown out of proportion. The best course of action was to take conservative measures. Kim was busy making calls in her office. She instructed the senior managers of the Cultural Media Department to visit historic sites around the world to collect ancient texts. The funds in their company's account emptied at a rapid rate. Her employees spent around $30 million every hour. Kim had made extensive preparations. The planes and ships are transporting the books to the warehouse as we speak. At the thought of books piling to the ceiling in the warehouse, Stephen realized they had a problem. Purchasing the books was easy. The hard part was reading them. There were many books that couldn't be analyzed using the computer. "Even if we get all of our people in here and spend the rest of our lives reading books, we might never finish." Kim had already come up with a solution. Martial artists with AI chips implanted are different from normal people. Their brains' computation and analysis abilities are thousands of times more efficient than you and me. It won't take them long to get through the mountains of books. Stephen was intrigued by her out-of-the-box suggestion. The brain of a brilliant CEO was indeed different. He called his subordinates, asking them to send over a group of these martial artists from Mirage Island. Electronic books could be scanned using a computer, so we would deal with those later. Stephen led the martial artists to the warehouse in the suburbs. An adjacent building had been prepared as their temporary lodgings. He informed them of their tasks and asked them to search for a particular ancient text. The martial artists sat in the living room and began to read. Stephen calculated their speed. They got through 4 or 5 pages in 1 second, as expected of a brain enhanced by a smart chip. He called Dr. Dalton and asked him to select another 20 inmates on death row and transplant the smart chip. "The AI chip isn't limited to combat. It's useful in daily life." Dr. Dalton was proud of himself and his team. It was thanks to their collective efforts that they achieved a major breakthrough. "Don't be too surprised, Mr. Adams. There's a lot more that you don't know. When we implanted the chip into a monkey during the trials, their intelligence reached the level of a high school student." This wasn't the end of their research. They had many more wild ideas they had yet to test, like placing the chip inside a bullet of a sniper rifle. No matter how sturdy and resilient a martial artist was, their eyes could always be fragile. If the bullet pierced an eyeball and entered the brain, the chip would activate and entangle with their neural system. This was a potential method to exert control over their enemies on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the man and his companions were in the process of sneaking into the training grounds with Tristan in tow. The security cameras changed positions every 3 seconds to expand the view. This meant that they had less than 3 seconds to bypass the cameras and make their way inside. This short period of time was sufficient for them to slip past the gates, but they were so focused on the security cameras that they didn't notice the drones in the air. When Stephen heard there were intruders, he hurried to the training grounds and waited in the car. Jace turned on the laptop and pulled up the real-time footage from the drones. They saw Tristan with 3 men. One of them was the man in black. They almost didn't recognize him. His disguise was flawless. He'd also concealed his aura, so they couldn't sense it from the outside. Stephen doubted that Tristan was a traitor. The most valuable items in the training grounds were weapons and equipment. He was from ancient times, but he never seemed that interested in planes, cannons, or firearms. "I think that man is threatening him." Jace had considered the possibility, but it was hard to believe. Tristan was formidable back then, and even more so now. How strong was the man in black to have subdued someone like him? While Stephen and Jace were trying to make sense of the situation, the man left his companions behind and climbed to the rooftop with Tristan. "The key to the treasury is right below us," the man said. "Don't pull any tricks. That talisman inside you is like a remote bomb. It'll kill you from the inside out once it's activated." Tristan pretended to be obedient. "Okay, it'll only take a few minutes to get what I need in the room." The man created an opening in the barbed wire covering the vent and motioned for Tristan to climb inside before following him. The drone in the sky caught their every movement. It was time to intercept them. Stephen led his team to the training grounds and went up to the top floor of the building. They made it to the corridor just as the man and Tristan entered the room through a vent. Stephen called out to the man from outside the door. "It's been a while since we've had guests. Why don't we sit down and catch up? It won't be easy for you to leave. You're surrounded." The man was startled to hear Stephen's voice. "Did you lure them here, old man?" he hissed. "Getting smart with me will lead to a painful death. Do you want to try me?" "I've been following you this entire time. When would I have had the chance to contact other people?" While Tristan defended himself, he twisted the lock of the safe, trying to buy as much time as possible. The man didn't have time to quarrel. He threw out his talismans, shattering the windows and doors. He draped his black robe over his disguise. Stephen recognized his familiar robe. There was no doubt about his identity now. "You've saved us the trouble of tracking you down." The Leviathan unit members stepped forward with their machine guns and fired at the man. The bullets were denser than a downpour. They filled up the small and narrow room. There were arrays set up throughout the building. Under their effects, a martial artist's strength was restricted, and their inner energy would be consumed at a faster rate. The Leviathan unit had opted for firearms for this very reason. The man's talismans floated around him to block the bullets. He quickly noticed that something was amiss. His talismans were weak, and his energy consumption was higher than normal. He glanced around the room and noticed that the murals on the wall were glowing. They were segments of an array, and they'd already been activated. The man felt like he'd fallen into an ocean. The airflow around him had condensed, making it difficult to coordinate his movements. He threw his talismans into the crowd, but the Leviathan unit was skilled and easily sidestepped them. They continued to fire. The shells of the bullets in their guns were laced with venom. The man would be incapacitated if the bullets so much as scratched his skin. There was an abundance of weapons and equipment at the training grounds. Stephen and his team had everything they needed to restrain the man and his companions. "How long are you planning to dawdle?" the man yelled over his shoulder. "Your talisman is suppressing me," Tristan said. "I can barely turn the knob. I can't help if I'm anxious." Contrary to his words, his hands were steadier than ever. He'd been watching the battle from the corner of his eye, but Stephen and his people were taking too long to kill the man. "Forget it," the man snapped. "We're leaving. We'll come back for it another day." "Okay, but before that, take this with you." Tristan mustered all of his strength and lifted the heavy safe. The lock clicked open, and a massive ball of fire burst out of the box, engulfing the man in flames. If the man weren't distracted by Stephen's people, Tristan wouldn't have been able to pull off his sneak attack. "You conniving old man," the man spat, dispersing the flames from his robe. Right before the ball of fire exploded, he'd stuck his talismans to his vitals and barely managed to get out of the ordeal alive. Tristan's body glowed as the talisman inside him activated. His skin and muscles began to melt, revealing the bones underneath. He gritted his teeth and shouted at Stephen. "Hurry up and kill him! I won't last much longer." Stephen's sword materialized in his hand, and he dashed towards the man, slicing at the talismans in his path. The clash of weapons sounded from the courtyard. The man's companions were attempting to break into the building to assist, but the Leviathan unit stopped them in their tracks. With the leader of the unit personally overseeing the situation, the man wouldn't be getting any backup. "Just surrender," Stephen advised. "Dragging the fight out is pointless. The tribulation sect should have disappeared a long time ago. Trying to compete with our country is a mistake. You only have yourselves to blame for the consequences." The man ignored him and manifested a phantom of a 9-headed snake. It swept towards the Leviathan unit. While they were distracted, the talismans condensed into a hollow iron ball and crashed into the wall. The man took advantage of the smoke and debris and leaped out of the building. Jace, the 3 guardians of the palace, and the Leviathan unit chased after him. Another heated battle ensued outside. Stephen hurried over to Tristan. His body was racked with convulsions. It was rapidly deteriorating. Stephen was at a loss for what to do. This wasn't a typical injury, nor was it poison. It was an unusual type of curse. The man had no intention of letting Tristan die a peaceful death. After the talisman activated, he would die after suffering a world of pain. "Is there anything I can do? Will medicinal pills help?" Tristan gasped for breath, struggling to get the words out. "I won't die that easily." He reached for the ribbon tying his long white hair into a ponytail and pulled out a miniature tower as small as a coin. "Infuse your inner energy into this. I'll take care of the rest." Stephen took the tower and did as instructed. Tristan didn't even have the strength to use his own weapon. He wouldn't last much longer. The tower expanded to the size of a box. Tristan reached inside and fumbled around. He pulled out a compressed pile of what appeared to be human skin. Stephen watched him in bewilderment, but there was no time for explanations. Tristan sliced into his wrist with his hand, and blood sprayed on the sack of skin. It inflated into a living, breathing human body of a young man dressed in clothes from ancient times. Stephen's eyes were wide in a combination of fascination and horror. He could sense the faint life force emitting from the body. "Your unorthodox techniques never fail to amaze me." Tristan managed a weak laugh. "You haven't seen a fraction of what I can do. It takes skill to make an enemy out of every martial artist I meet." With the last of his strength, he gouged out his eyeball and set it on top of the human body for it to be absorbed. The talisman had run its course, and Tristan's body dissolved into a pool of blood. In the next moment, the body of the young man stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and he sat up. Tristan had revived. He jumped to his feet, exercised his joints, and quickly adapted to his new body. He appeared to be a young man in his 20s, around the same age as Stephen. Stephen's brain was still trying to process the unbelievable scene he'd just witnessed. "If you can transfer bodies every time you're at the brink of death, doesn't that mean you've achieved eternal life?" Tristan scoffed. "It's not that simple to find a suitable body. I was reluctant to use this technique back then, so I faked my death. You know how that turned out." The two of them went to the window and looked outside. The leader of the Leviathan unit was unfurling his scroll, while his subordinates restrained the man and his companions with chains. "You're too unreliable," his companions grumbled. "It's not your first time in the city, but you let some old thief play you like a fiddle." "Shut it," the man snapped. "If you have time to complain, think of a way to get out of here." The 3 of them placed talismans on their chests, increasing their strength by several hundred times. They manifested a phantom of a 3-legged golden crow. It was a divine bird from the legends, rumored to have the ability to devour the sun. The chains were burned into molten iron, scattering over the ground. Stephen jumped out the window and landed in the middle of the battlefield with the phantom of the fire kiln. He slammed his fist into the earth. Blue flames outlined the cracks spreading across the ground, trapping the man and his companions inside his domain of hellfire. "If you 3 are using your talismans on yourselves, that means you're out of options. Just surrender and save us the hassle." The man laughed. "An ignorant brat like you has no idea how fearsome the tribulation sect can be." The crow flapped its wings, kicking up a dust storm as it soared into the sky. The kiln let out a roar, and the sound waves enveloped the crow. Everyone present sealed their senses to avoid being affected. While both sides were in a deadlock, the injured members of the Leviathan unit retreated to the sidelines. Smoke rose from their wounds as they continued to burn. The confrontation was too much to handle for typical martial artists. The Leviathan unit's leader ordered them to stay back. He used his scroll to cast a summoning spell. A mass as black as ink appeared in the sky, and a large coffin descended from the crack in the clouds. Stephen had seen him use this technique before, so he knew what to expect. He leaped onto the kiln's back and threw out waves of his aura at the man and his companions. An army of skeletons jumped out of the coffin. They had been collected from previous battles. The man and his companions mocked the Leviathan unit's leader. You claim you're the good guys, but you're resorting to sinister techniques. How hypocritical can you be? You killed innocents for no reason to fuel that coffin. Open your eyes, Stephen shot back, and take a good look at the situation. Those were our enemies, and if you aren't careful, the next 3 skeletons will be you. While the Killin and the Crow clashed in the air, Stephen leaped toward the middle of the skeletons and commanded them to launch a fierce siege. The man and his companions fought barehanded. Their talismans were attached to their robes to enhance their strength and to provide a defensive barrier. They couldn't be used as weapons anymore, but their bare fists were enough to shatter the skeletons. But as soon as they collapsed into a pile of bones, they reassembled and continued attacking. The skeletons' regeneration was never-ending, and the blue flames burned brighter as they absorbed their inner energy. This battle could go on forever, but it would end in the man and his companions' defeat. Tristan was standing by the window. His fusion with his new body was finally complete. He couldn't wait to take his revenge on the 3 men for all the torture they'd put him through. Tristan tossed 7 gems in their direction. They oriented themselves into the 3 men's blind spots and struck them in their sides. The gems were heavier than a boulder. A light touch could stagger a normal person. When one of the gems collided with their targets, the power of all 7 would experience a 7-fold increase. If the target was injured, its power would be evenly distributed, reducing it to 1/7 of its original power. The constant fluctuation in power made the gems difficult to destroy. The man looked around, searching for the culprit. Stop with the cowardly tricks and show yourself. Why should I? Tristan retorted out of sight. I don't care about being a coward. The only thing I want are your heads. He increased the speed of the 7 gems. They chased after the man and his companions and caught them off guard whenever their focus shifted to the skeletons. Nor, Wes, and Aston used their inner energy to make the ground cave in, filling it with sand. The man and his companions sank into the quicksand, and they were trapped when it hardened from the flames. They were at a major disadvantage and had to get out of here. But first, they had to retrieve the crow. The 3 of them used their fists to shatter the glass-like sand before scurrying over to where the 2 beasts were clashing. At their signal, the crow pulled back and flew in the opposite direction. Just as Stephen was about to give chase, blood fell like rain from the coffin. The crow was riddled with holes the instant it came in contact with the corrosive liquid. The phantom vanished in less than a minute. The man and his companions stayed close to the ground to avoid touching the blood. They ran in the direction of the city outskirts. They didn't get very far before a group of people blocked their path. It was the internal member of the Blood Fiend Valley and his fellow students. Finally, you and I can settle the score once and for all. The man cursed under his breath. Where were all these people jumping out from? But there was no point in complaining, so he braced himself for another fight. The man and his companions lunged for the internal members, but their swords weren't easy to handle. Every time a talisman was cut in half, its energy was absorbed into their swords, rendering the talismans useless. The talismans amplified the 3 men's strength, but they couldn't withstand the continuous consumption. They felt their inner energy draining rapidly. Nor, Wes, and Aston caught up to them and sent a wave of sand in their direction. There wasn't much room for them to dodge, so they could only jump backward to avoid it. There was no time to catch their breath before the next wave of attacks came rushing over. Stephen dashed behind them with his sword, aiming for one of the man's companions. He was experienced in battle, and he managed to avoid a fatal blow, but he couldn't dodge Stephen's attack completely. His right arm was severed by a sword. His scream unnerved the man and his uninjured companion. They condensed their inner energy into balls of light and threw them at a civilian building nearby. When Stephen and his people were distracted, trying to contain the damage, the man and his uninjured companion fled outside the city. Catching one of them alive was good enough. The 3 guardians, the internal members from the ancient martial arts factions, and the Leviathan unit continued their pursuit, while Stephen escorted their captive to a military prison. He stuffed a few pills into his mouth, and his wound stopped bleeding. Stephen brought a chair over and sat across from the captive to begin the interrogation. I'm warning you now, don't expect your colleagues to save you. Don't waste your breath. If you're going to kill me, then do it. The captive's tone was firm, and from the resolute expression on his face, it was certain that he would fight to the end. They stared at each other for 3 minutes before Stephen stood up, stretched, and left the interrogation room. "Mr. Adams, would you like me to make him talk?" Jace volunteered. "There's no need. I'll ask Dr. Dalton to perform a minor operation on him." During the battle, Stephen confirmed that the man and his companions were at the immortal realm. Martial artists like them were rare and useful. The severed arm had been retrieved and was stored in a nutrient solution to maintain its condition. Stephen asked his subordinates to arrange a private jet to take the captive and his severed arm to Mirage Island. Dr. Dalton would handle the rest. Just as the sun was setting, the team chasing after the man and his companion returned. They'd left them somewhere in the forest. The Leviathan unit's leader found Stephen in his office to express his apology for losing the man again. Stephen didn't think too much of it. This was to be expected when dealing with two martial artists at the immortal realm. The man and his companion would show themselves again after they released the bait to lure them back. When Kim instructed the staff of the Cultural Media Department to purchase books from around the world, every country was confused by her actions. The price of the relevant shares fluctuated, and even the cost of the paper was on the rise. This bait would lure the man and his companion out of hiding sooner or later. "Where should we set up a trap for them?" the Leviathan unit's leader asked. Stephen thought about it. Having an intense battle in Annapolis was out of the question, but Tristan's tower could be an alternative. It would be useful in containing the destruction. He went to the training grounds to look for him. After being reborn, Tristan's appearance was young enough to call Stephen his brother. He started grumbling the moment Stephen walked into the training grounds. "You always fail at critical moments. You couldn't even take care of a few members from the Tribulation sect on your own?" "You talk as if you contributed," Stephen retorted. "Aside from using your gems to attack their blind spots, you didn't do much else." Tristan didn't feel an ounce of shame from being called out. The secret to a long life is to prioritize your survival before anyone else's. Fighting comes second. Tristan had a thorough understanding of the United States' complicated dynamics. After gaining his new body, he was ready to leave this land of problems and find somewhere relaxing to take a vacation. After the lengths Stephen had gone through to save Tristan's hide, he couldn't just let him leave. He requested his assistance. Tristan heaved a sigh. At this point, their acquaintanceship had upgraded to reluctant friends who'd survived multiple life-and-death crises together. If he heartlessly turned Stephen down, it would go against his principles and weigh on his conscience. But he was even more reluctant to leave the country for a vacation while leaving Stephen with his tower unattended. After a long silence, Tristan sighed again and said, "You're such a troublemaker. Fine, I'll help you this time, but no matter how the upcoming battle turns out, I'll have no part in it." "Don't you have any confidence in our abilities? Besides, the Tribulation sect was that powerful, they would have revealed themselves to the public a long time ago to prepare their grand scheme in ruling the world." Tristan didn't bother arguing with him. Before the battle, he wanted to give Stephen a special training session to increase his strength and cultivation. Even if he didn't improve, he would at least be familiar with the combat styles and techniques of stronger martial artists. In ancient times, the immortal realm was considered common among martial artists. "I was going to take it easy for the next few days, so I'll use this time to train you." Stephen brightened at the opportunity. "Am I the only one you're willing to train?" "Why? Were you going to invite your little followers? The people around you are either too old or stuck in a bottleneck in their cultivation. They won't be able to make any significant progress in such a short amount of time." Stephen didn't give up. He couldn't be the only one to benefit from this. It would be a wasted opportunity. After some deliberation, he settled on the ideal candidate. "I have the perfect person in mind. His cultivation isn't that high, but he's intelligent. If he watches me fight, he'll be able to come up with countermeasures." The matter was settled when Tristan agreed. Stephen didn't have time to wait for Dr. Dalton's operation to finish. He called the Leviathan unit's military advisor and strategist, Salim. This was the intellectual he'd chosen to accompany him. In the middle of the night, Tristan restored his tower to its original size under the light of the moon. Salim was still in disbelief over Stephen's call. He'd never expected to be chosen for such an important mission. Tristan opened the door to the tower, and a whirlpool of light appeared at the entrance. "Don't go running off," he warned Salim. "Just follow me inside." Stephen and Salim filed into the tower after Tristan. Their surroundings blurred, and their minds reeled. When they opened their eyes again, they found themselves inside a magnificent underground palace. Tristan tossed his 7 gems into the air, and they floated to a lamp at the center of the room. The entire palace lit up. "The gems have finally returned to its rightful owner. I stole them from a tomb in this palace. I only used them once in battle." "You've explored this place before?" Stephen asked. "That's right." Stephen reached out with his aura, but he didn't sense any signs of death. There was no coffin or even a skeleton. "Who was laid to rest here?" "During a chaotic war in my time, a certain country didn't want the graves of his martial artists to be robbed, so he built a cemetery in this palace to hide their remains." Tristan placed his hand on one of the many large stone statues. The bodies of numerous deceased martial artists were sealed within the stone. The moment of their death on the battlefield was preserved. That was the only way to honor their memory. "Are you ready?" "Bring it on," Stephen said. He and Salim scanned their surroundings, but they couldn't sense any living beings around them. Were their sparring partners invisible? Tristan released a wave of his inner energy towards one of the stone statues. Before his attack could land, the statue emitted a scarlet glow, and a phantom of an ancient martial artist appeared. It lunged for Stephen without warning. Tristan turned around and started walking away. "Bend them off however you want. I'm going to take a break on the side." His appearance might have changed, but his crafty personality remained the same. As curses towards Tristan ran through Stephen and Salim's mind, they engaged in a bitter battle. In the blink of an eye, they'd received over 100 heavy punches. They'd been turned into human sandbags. Stephen didn't have an accurate assessment of the martial artist's cultivation. He was at least at the peak of the immortal realm, and this was only a fraction of his real cultivation when he was alive. If his real body was here, he could crush them with one finger. "How are we supposed to take him down?" Stephen called out. "Just survive," Tristan said. "That's all you two have to do." Stephen and Salim stood with their backs to each other, blocking attacks from all sides. The ancient martial artist was an illusory phantom. Their attacks had no effect, but his attacks were as real as they could get. Each punch and kick packed a surprising amount of force. One hit was enough to disrupt Stephen's inner energy to the point of disarray. The ancient martial artist's attack didn't require too much energy. He relied on the perfect timing and angle to execute his moves. The spar intensified, and it felt like they'd been transported to a battlefield, caught in a life-or-death battle. Stephen could barely breathe from the exertion, but he still had words of praise for the ancient martial artist. "Not just anyone can reach his level. It can't be achieved by simple cultivation." Salim, whose face was swollen, didn't have it in him to utter any compliments. He finally understood the saying, "If there's no diamond, don't embrace the porcelain." Training by the sovereign side was a golden opportunity, but that didn't mean there wouldn't be any suffering. Using weapons against the ancient martial artist wasn't effective. His punches and kicks reached through the gaps in their strikes. Stephen and Salim tried a different tactic. Instead of going on the offensive, they circulated their inner energy to their legs to gain the advantage using their speed. But the martial artist was faster. It was easier for him to break through their defenses and land another hit. Stephen bent down, putting his hands on his knees as he panted for breath. "Can't we take a break? We're about to die of exhaustion." Assuming the role of an instructor, Tristan began to criticize them harshly. "Only a battle of life and death can bring out the full potential of a martial artist. Don't be lazy and try to weasel your way out of this. I won't stop the spar unless blood is spilled." Salim was terrified. His hair stood on end. Before he set off with Stephen, Nor Wesson Aston had given him multiple warnings in private. No matter what the situation was, he had to ensure Stephen's safety. Even if he had to give up his life, he couldn't let Stephen sustain even a single minor injury. "Mr. Adams, please take a break. I'll cover for you." With that, Salim brandished his sword and rushed back into battle. Stephen was confused. "When did you get so brave?" Don't overdo it. This is nothing. I can handle this much. As soon as the words left Salim's mouth, he received a few more punches to the abdomen. But he didn't falter. He spun on his heel and launched a counterattack of dazzling sword strikes. Stephen didn't know what had gotten into him. He figured Salim was just trying to increase the intensity of his training to improve his martial arts. With a mind full of questions, Stephen sat next to Tristan on one side. I feel like our sparring partner isn't using his full strength. You guessed right. You have to steal the treasures for their true body to break through the stone bindings and eliminate the intruder. Stephen glanced at the 7 gems embedded in the lamp. If Tristan stole these back then, didn't that mean he'd already fought with the strongest guard in the underground palace? When you stole the gems, how did you escape from the guards? Tristan laughed. Are you doubting my martial arts? Obviously, I defeated them. His ambition was thousands of miles ahead of Stephen's, and his accomplishments were far greater. After thousands of years in a comatose state, his cultivation had dwindled, and he hadn't been able to recover to his peak condition. It was already a miracle that his body had been preserved for so long. The world's inhabitants were bound by the laws of nature. They couldn't defy the heavens. Before they could discuss anything else, Salim's sword was knocked out of his hands. Stephen called out to him. You should come back and take a break. It's my turn. Be careful, Mr. Adams. Salim scrambled to the edge of the room as Stephen appeared in front of the ancient martial artist and blocked his attack. His sword was useless, so he decided to compete with pure martial arts. The martial artist was a phantom. Only his strength was real. Stephen focused on the way he swung his fist. The other movements were nothing more than fancy details. As Stephen's concentration increased, he found himself successfully defending instead of taking hits. When their fists collided, he was the only one who felt the rebound. The martial artist was a phantom and didn't feel a thing. Their moves were a blur, and neither side had any intention of stopping. They continued to fight to the death. Salim sat cross-legged on the side, using his fastest speed to adjust the flow of his inner energy so he could get back to assisting Stephen. Mr. Adams' stamina is almost at its limit. If this continues, he'll be injured. Don't underestimate him, Tristan said simply. I'm not. More than 10,000 moves were exchanged. Mr. Adams didn't hold back. He was using his full strength. The rules were set, and they couldn't be changed. Tristan didn't move an inch. He leisurely sat on the sidelines and watched the spar. His nonchalant attitude grated on Salim's nerves. If it weren't for the huge difference in their cultivation, he would have taught him a lesson. You young people have no idea what your limits are and how to get there. After sustaining and executing repeated attacks, the cells in your muscles will imprint those moves to memory. For example, if Stephen loses consciousness, his body won't be defenseless. His body will instinctively protect itself through muscle memory. Salim had never heard of this concept before. The example Tristan was describing was similar to a person in a coma participating in a sports competition and obtaining a high ranking. As Salim had said, Stephen was reaching his limit. He'd thrown more than 100,000 punches. To prevent the soreness of his muscles and the pain from transmitting to his brain, he'd cut off the neural connection. He couldn't feel the contraction of his muscles, nor could he feel the force of the impact when his blows landed. He was relying solely on his memory and his movements to deliver attacks similar to before he'd cut off the connection. Tristan saw everything from the sidelines, and he was impressed. Stephen had passed the training. His aptitude for martial arts is more outstanding than I thought. He grasped the concept of muscle memory in such a short period of time. Stephen didn't share his excitement. Make them stop, he demanded through clenched teeth. If you don't, I'm going to destroy this place and trigger all the guards. I won't be the only one buried alive. Tristan slowly walked over to the statue and tapped his finger on the surface. The ancient martial artist froze, as if a pause button had been pressed. He vanished a moment later. Stephen flopped on his back, chest heaving as he gasped for air. Salim didn't think it was possible for someone's physical strength to be forcefully squeezed out of their body, but that was exactly what Stephen had done.